Good morning and welcome. You're tuning in to the early Stylo News Intelligence Update Explainer for July 8th, 2026. I'll be guiding you through today's deep strikes and deadlock diplomacy Ukraine war intelligence brief. We're jumping right in to give you a calm, purely factual look at the evolving realities on the ground.
Now, before we get to the map, I'd like to mention our sponsor, ProWave AI. They're the developers behind Stylo Intel, that's the AI-powered open-source intelligence platform, and Stylo News, the commercial version you can find on the web and mobile apps. They've processed the data driving today's briefing.
Here's what's on the radar for today's briefing. We'll be covering the current diplomatic deadlock, strategic strikes into Russian territory, recent force mobilization tactics, and finally, those ongoing nuclear debates on NATO's eastern flank.
Let's get straight into it with our first area of focus, diplomatic stagnation and tactical contests.
Looking at the broader theater, things remain incredibly contested. Ground initiative right now? Well, it's actually favoring Russia in pockets like Pavlograd and the Kyiv region. But if you look at the wider scope, Ukraine is showing a really distinct advantage in deep strike capabilities. They're consistently innovating and hitting targets far beyond that immediate front line.
On the diplomatic front, frankly, we're at a standstill. There's just no convergence on the big core issues. Territory, security guarantees, you know the list. The negotiations happening right now, they're really more about managing escalation and coalition messaging than hammering out a lasting peace. And instead of pulling back, we're seeing both sides actively ramping up their long-range strike capabilities.
Which brings us right to the reality on the ground. Let's look at strategic strikes and force mobilization.
Just looking back at late June, we saw a really rapid sequence of escalation. On June 24th, Crimean power and fuel infrastructure took a major hit. Just 2 days later, Russia reported taking down nearly 700 Ukrainian drones in a single night. And then by the 28th, we saw significant fires at a refinery and a power plant in southern Russia. It's a very clear, sustained focus on choking off logistics and energy.
These aren't just isolated events, right? They translate to immediate tactical realities. We've seen critical bridge infrastructure targeted in occupied Crimea and Zaporizhzhia. Those bridges are the lifeblood for supply runs. When you degrade them, you are directly and deliberately throwing a wrench into Russian military logistics.
Now, to sustain these operations, manpower is an obvious necessity, and Russia is facing persistent shortages due to ongoing losses. To counter this, they're currently offering contract payments up to $60,000. That is an exceptionally high financial incentive. At the same time, intelligence indicates coercive recruitment tactics, things like detainment and forced enlistment, happening in regions like Penza.
So, what does this actually look like for the people there? The impacts are widespread, stretching all the way from Crimea to Bashkortostan. Infrastructure damage means power outages and fuel shortages for civilians, while simultaneously bottlenecking military supply lines. Combine that with aggressive recruitment drives, and you're seeing a significant strain on local communities and economies on both sides of the conflict.
Of course, actions of this scale never happen in a vacuum. Let's shift gears to international repercussions and NATO posturing.
We're seeing localized tactical actions ripple out across Eastern Europe in real time. We are talking about persistent gray zone pressures, actions hovering just below the threshold of open war. For instance, sudden military exercises recently kicked off in Belarus. Over in Romania, a drone incident actually led to reciprocal consulate closures. Add in rising nationalist rhetoric in Poland and a new German troop deployment in Lithuania, and you can clearly see how the spillover risks on NATO's eastern flank are steadily climbing.
The regional anxiety is perhaps best captured by a recent debate in Lithuania. Incoming Prime Minister Mindaugas Sinkevičius has stated he supports removing constitutional bans on hosting weapons of mass destruction. He frames this as a necessary deterrent against aggression. Whether you agree with the approach or not, it represents a historic pivot for defense policy in the Baltics, hinting at a broader regional shift toward nuclear deterrence.
To understand where this is going, we need to look at the viewpoints driving it. Let's examine the decision-maker perspectives. When we look at the key players, we see two very firm, opposing viewpoints. The Russian government portrays NATO as a hostile collective, arguing they are compelled to increase recruitment to sustain their offensive and defend their interests. On the flip side, the Ukrainian government frames its logistic strikes as long-range sanctions. For them, it's a completely justified strategy to degrade Russia's war machine and maintain their own offensive readiness.
And you can see this strategic divide mirrored perfectly across social media. The echo chambers are fascinating to track. Followers of Ukrainian sources, like the Kyiv Post, express a highly pro-resilience sentiment, heavily supporting the strikes. Meanwhile, Russian state media like RIA.ru generates defensive, nationalistic responses, framing Western moves as direct threats. And then you have independent outlets like the Moscow Times, where the prevailing sentiment is highly critical of the Kremlin, focusing intensely on the war's mounting costs.
So what does this all mean for the immediate future? Let's turn to our strategic forecast. Based on the data, here's what you should watch for in the coming weeks. First, expect a widening of that strategic gray zone pressure along NATO borders as the war's effects continue to spill over. Second, anticipate continued deep strike asymmetry from Ukraine as they keep refining their logistics targeting. And finally, be on the lookout for intensified Russian recruitment drives as they push to support their localized ground offensives.
Ultimately, these developments are putting a tremendous, unprecedented strain on international arms control frameworks. It really begs the question, are we witnessing a new era of deterrence being built, or the unraveling of European security altogether? Well, that's what we're here to track. This has been a short lead-in to give you the facts to start your day. To get the full analysis of the past 2 weeks, be sure to listen to the complete Stylo News Intel Update Morning podcast on your favorite channel, or just follow the link on this post. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to subscribe to Stylo News at www.stylonews.com for AI-powered news on demand. Have a great morning and stay informed.